And welcome back once again to Capitol Tonight. So in yesterday's State of the State, Governor Cuomo called for the creation of the New York Works Fund and task force to plan and oversee infrastructure projects around the state. That is a very big job. Cuomo wants to see 2,000 miles of roads repaired, more than 100 bridges repaired or replaced, and improvements to dams, water systems, and state parks. The state's contractors and businesses say that they are more than up to this challenge. Here to explain more is Mike Elmendorf. He is the president and the CEO of the Associated General Contractors of New York. And we also have with us Mike Durant. He is the New York director of the National Federation of Independent Businesses. Thank you both for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so you liked what you heard. Generally speaking, let's just say it with an overview. Mike, we'll start with you.
Well, I think that I went into the speech looking at this really as a progression of what the governor did last year. Last year he came out with a property tax cap and ending the millionaire's tax and a responsible state fiscal plan. I think I wanted to see this as a continuation of the momentum that the business community has faced. I think the governor did just that. He came out and he said, we're going to tackle mandate relief, a big deal for myself and I know for Mike's organization. We're going to talk about a responsible fiscal plan, no tax, no fees, no gimmicks. And I think he really laid the groundwork to roll up your sleeves and kind of get a little dirtier this legislative session to tackle some of these key issues that really, I think, are connected to what he did last year.
And you were satisfied with what you heard on mandate relief? Because what I heard on mandate relief is mandate relief, we have to do it. Now let's move on. Well,
I was satisfied in this respect. The mandate redesign team really has been a disappointment. 280, and that's an understatement. $280 million of savings. While I'll never come down heavy on the state for having some sort of savings, continuing with the norm used to be, there needs to be a lot more. They haven't tackled tri-borough, WIC, scaffold, a lot of the issues that Mike and I and other business leaders have talked about. The fact that they're going to have public hearings so I can engage, so my membership can get engaged, and have an up or down vote at the end of session in an election year is a fantastic opportunity for us.
Well, the task force did have public meetings, ostensibly, right? But we weren't exactly sure when they were. He did not, though, notably tackle or mention, when he said mandate relief, the only specific thing, again, that I understood was pension reform in the form, which is a mandate, in the form of a creation of a sixth tier, which, of course, the unions can't stand.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Mike. I think what we've seen so far in mandate relief hasn't been enough, and I think most observers would agree with that. You know, we were both part of leading a coalition, really a pretty historic coalition of business groups, our organizations, the Business Council, Farm Bureau, and Shackle Upstate, but some new partners like the Conference of Mayors, the New York State School Boards Association, the school superintendents, I know it's been talked about on the show, who advanced a real agenda of mandate relief, which included pension reform, which included things like Mike talked about, the WICS law, the scaffold law that others have been talking about for years, that result in real substantial savings. And I hope that we'll have an opportunity to get some of those things, you know, on the agenda and move forward, because now is the time.
I saw Speaker Silver quoted, I think in the Times-Union, saying that the speech was not really an attack on lawmakers, specifically when you don't bring up things like tri-borough or WICS or any of these other sort of hot-button issues with labor, which have traditionally been, although not always, allied with the Democrats. It's an election year. Look, I mean, you don't want to have state lawmakers on the hot seat on some of these really intractable issues. I mean, do you believe that? Do you believe he was not as aggressive as he could have been in an election year?
Well, look, everybody knows this governor is not shy, he's been very effective.
Speaking of understatements, yes.
I think he has worked very well with the legislature, with both the Republican Senate and the Democratic Assembly, and there's no arguing with results. He achieved virtually every single objective that he set out in his first year, including the property tax cap that both Mike and I worked very hard to get done. And I think he set the stage for what ought to be a very successful second year, and certainly from AGC's perspective, the focus that he laid out on rebuilding infrastructure and the resources that he's talking about committing to do that is really historic.
And the task force, sort of this overseeing body that really, it sounded to me like, and you should correct me if I'm wrong, some sort of clearinghouse which knows what one hand is doing while the other hand is doing something in New York City. In other words, you have these projects that are all over the map and nobody really is talking to one another on how they're working.
I think in some cases that happens, and not every case is that how it works. I think there's a lot that the state does in these areas that they do well, The biggest problem has been the lack of resources, and we've talked about this a number of times on the show. You've got a lot of federal dollars that support this kind of work that has been lacking, and you haven't had a transportation bill in almost 3 years now coming out of Washington, so we can't look there for help. And on the state level, there's been a real lack of investment in infrastructure. It's deteriorated. The longer you put off investing in and improving and repairing it, the worse it gets, the more expensive it gets, and it just so happens to have intersected with the economy being in a very bad place and government's not having a lot of money. So you've got to do something innovative and creative and bold, and I think that's what the governor's trying to do.
Mike, let me just turn to you for a second. We did hear from someone who, not the governor, Shelley Silver, again, the Assembly Speaker, before the governor's speech said his main goal would be an increase, you're smiling, an increase in the minimum wage.
Right.
Obviously, it's not something you support.
No, no. You know, the minimum wage increase, you know, I came out and I offered some comments on the Speaker's proposal today, and I know E.J. McMahon did as well. I mean, this is going to, in effect, be a job killer. Small business owners are already dealing with a precarious economic situation, both in the state and nationally. They're not hiring, yet politicians always say small business owners are the economic engine, the powerhouse that's going to drive us to a better future. Well, you can't do that and then mandate on small business owners that they have to pay a certain level. Employers all around the state value their employees. They're going to offer the best compensation package to them as possible, but allow them to do what's sustainable for them. Don't, you know, raise the minimum wage. Potentially lower wage income workers could lose their job. You might make a decision to go with teams. It's just going to create, I think, more job loss.
Okay, do you think that there is a political will, or is that just sort of red meat from the Speaker to his base, which is, of course, the progressive, sort of more liberal base, again in an election year? I mean, the Senate, under GOP control, did at one time raise the minimum wage. It was a big deal. You might have been in at that time, not with the Senate, but with Pataki.
Yes, I was.
It was huge for Joe Bruno, and they were doing it in part to try and save Nick Spano, if I remember correctly. Yeah. It didn't work in the long term.
No, and I think that this issue is a great thing for the Speaker to bring up from a political perspective in an election year, to say top priority for my conference is going to be to drive minimum wage. Ultimately, it's what I deem will be a failed policy. I hope that the Senate will listen to what I'm saying, to what EJ and I'm sure other business activists across the state are going to say, that it's a job killer. It will negate a lot of the positives that we have done so far.
And I would just add on that point, it's really a canard, too. I mean, the idea that you have families around the state that are supporting a household or supporting a family on minimum wage, it's just not true. They're entry-level workers. But what it does is it then creates a pressure on the whole wage structure for a business that everybody thinks, because the minimum wage went up, that everybody's wages go up. And
do you really not believe that there are folks, like folks who are immigrants, for example, who have entry-level jobs and are supporting families on
There's not many. I mean, the reality just is that it tends to be entry-level workers, and it tends to be a lot of young workers. And what it does is, as Mike said, results in less hiring. And you know, last year the governor said in the State of the State, we have no future as the tax capital of the nation. He was right. But we also don't have much of a future if we continue to be the state that has the second or third, depending on how well we did that year, highest cost of doing business. And proposals like this are just steps in the wrong direction.
You also did say, and you know, it's interesting because the response, and I've been saying this a lot because I think that viewers really need to understand this, and your experience in the Pataki administration will, I hope, you will say you agree. The State of the State is sort of a general blueprint. It is not usually full of details. And so when I say there are things that weren't in there, of course there were things that weren't in there because it's tradition that you don't put them in there. However, hydrofracking, not mentioned, you missed it.
Yeah, you know, I missed hydrofracking to the extent that I would like to hear the governor say it. Just to bring it up, I know he did in his book, his policy.
Which was not distributed to the people in the room.
Right.
The press had it, and lawmakers had it.
So we relied on folks like yourself that were tweeting and saying, you know, the governor has omitted or skipped over. I think the governor has stated all along that hydrofracking is something that's going to be governed by science. He's going to go through the process. I'm very supportive of the process, that we need to find the balance for the economic benefits, which I believe are substantial. And also, if there's any issue with, to mitigate any environmental or potential health issues, I think the DC is doing a good job. The comment period ends in a week, or about 10 days, and we'll see where he goes from there. If it gets ignored, or if we continue to have delay, then I know that for the members that I represent, we're supportive of hydrofracking. It's going to become somewhat problematic.
Yeah, I wasn't overly concerned not to see it. I mean, there's a process underway. That process is continuing. It's hopefully nearing a conclusion, and I'm not sure why it was in the printed version and not in the speech. I think that contributed to some of the some of the chatter here, but I'm hopeful that in the end the conclusion will be that we can do this safely, because that's certainly what we believe.
Yeah, but the genius of not saying something means that all people can come to their own conclusions. You guys say, well, we weren't terribly worried about it because we believe that the process is going forward. And anyway, he said in his printed version the process is going forward. He didn't really say very much, even in the printed version. Right. Not intoning it publicly gave hope to the other side. I know because I've received their press releases too.
But I'm not sure there's a lot to say while you have this process underway. I think, you know, the governor has said very clearly this is going to happen in New York if and only if we're convinced it can be done safely.
But just to counter that, he also specifically singled out the Tappan Zee, which I know, and we've talked about it a lot here, but the Tappan, it's clear that by intoning specific things, you say these things are important enough, well, I've got you all here and I have your attention to make you know I want the Tappan Zee done, I want infrastructure done, I want all of these things to be happening. And when you leave it out, indicates that perhaps you don't want to talk about it for some reason, or you don't think it's as important.
Well, I think the gas development is a little bit different because, again, there is a clear regulatory process taking place right now.
But there's a process for the Tappan Zee taking place right now too.
But that's a little bit different. I mean, that's a project that the administration is driving, and it's something that has been out there for 15 years. That's not new, and they're taking a slightly new direction in it, which I think is a much more realistic direction, frankly, and I think it's going to get done in the near term. The gas development, I think we'll hear from the governor more definitively on that when the DEC has had an opportunity to do their job.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it here. I know you guys have both been back on many occasions, so thank you for being here, Mike.
Thank you.
Mike and Mike. It's like Mike squared.
Mike and Mike show.
Thank you very much. You know, we could syndicate that. I'm just, maybe.
I'm in.
You never know. Okay, so right now,